Hey, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, folks joining in from different parts of the world. Very excited to welcome you for our session today, solving the puzzle of mobile testing. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. Today's session is going to be a 1 hour session, and we will be muting all participants so that we could have a smooth flow. However, we will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end for that. And at any point in time, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask the questions in the chat window, and then we will answer those at the end in the order in which it was received. And also, this session is being recorded. So if you need to drop off at any point in time, we will be recording this, and the recording will be made available to all the attendees after the session as well. So with that, would like to introduce myself. I'm Rahul Akanpal, your host and the moderator for today's Fireside Chat. Been with BrowserStack for almost 2 years now. I'm part of the product marketing team. And prior to BrowserStack, had a few stints in organizations like Honeywell, SAP, and Workday as well. However, I'm very, very excited to have and introduce two of our panelists for today, Thomas as well as Anamika. So would like to start out and hand it over to Thomas to give a quick overview and introduction about himself and a little bit about Nagarro as well. So with that, Thomas, if you would please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Rahul, and thanks for having us. It's really exciting. A little bit about myself. I've been in the field of quality assurance and testing for almost 20 years, and I have the honor of right now leading a global test automation practice together with my colleague Rajesh. We've been, working on test automation since before smartphones and mobile testing, as you will hear about today, was a thing. And we at Nagarro, we're around 20,000 techies all over the world. We're a global IT and development service provider with a strong focus on business value. Our motto is thinking breakthroughs. So not only the technical side, but also helping our customers make the most of their business with new technologies. And that's why we're really excited to be here today and talk about one of those streams that has become more and more important in our global market. So thanks a lot for hosting us.
Happy to have you guys join in, and very excited for our chat today. Anamika, welcome to the session as well, and would be great if you could, again, similar to Thomas, provide a bit of an overview and a background about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rahul, and thank you for having us. So myself, Anamika, and I've been with Nagarro for almost 7 years now, and I've been in the industry for 10 years. And I am leading the mobile testing practice in Nagarro, and we do and look after all things about mobile testing. And yep, very excited to be here today.
Great. Thank you so much, Anamika. So guys, before we go into the session further, we have a global panelist audience, and then we have folks joining in from different parts of the world. So this is one thing that we really love to do, is to hear more where you're joining in from. For you to answer this live poll, you have two options. Since we are anyways doing solving the puzzle of mobile testing, it would be great if you could take out your mobile phones, scan the QR code, and answer from there itself. For others, you could even go to slido.com and use the code 3028295 and answer or provide your answers there as well. So just see, oh wow, we have folks, quite a few folks from Europe, from Prague, from Turkey, Austria as well, Chennai, yeah, a few from US, Minnesota, Florida, more folks from Turkey as well as USA. This is great. And I love it, given the fact that, we are in so many different time zones and people from all over the globe are attending it. So this is great. Just give like a few more minutes. Awesome. Yeah, Portugal. Yeah, Vegas. Oh, folks from Vegas. It's pretty early your time to be joining in. Great. Awesome. So yeah, I think that's again one of our goals, is to ensure that the content and the session is relevant to a global audience. As we can clearly see, we have a lot of folks from India, from USA, from New Jersey, several places in Europe as well. So moving on, a little bit about BrowserStack. So we are the world's leading software testing platform. And when we say leading, this is something that we don't take lightly, right? So I will go into shortly in terms of why we mean that we are the world's leading software testing platform. A little bit about BrowserStack. The journey of BrowserStack started almost around 12 years back now in 2011, where our co-founders Ritesh and Nakul started the company with just the two of them. And in the first year itself, the company grew, got a great momentum of reaching 1,000+ customers. And that momentum just continued going on. Over the next 4 years after that, we launched our own global device cloud. We launched 5 new products, had multiple funding rounds along the way from large venture funds like Axel. We also did a acquisition on Percy. And along this 11, 12 years, we've grown to more than 1,000+ employees across several different global locations. And that is just the start. As I mentioned, we've launched several products on the web testing space, which is our BrowserStack Live and Automate and Percy. We also have mobile testing applications for App Live and App Automate for you to test on your mobile devices, the mobile apps. And then we have several free tools available out there for you guys to test as well. And when I said we are the largest or one of the leading providers, this is what I meant in terms of the scale. We have over 6 million registered users on our platform that uses the platform to test. 72 billion Selenium commands are being run on our platform every single year. And just as we could see, there were attendees from all over the globe. Our customers are all over the globe as well, with customers in more than 135 countries. And a big part of that is because we have 19 global data centers across 13 different locations to ensure that no matter where you are testing from, the latency is very reduced. If there is minimal latency, you are kind of using it from the data centers closest to you. And we have customers of all shapes and sizes, from individual developers working off their garages to startups to some of the largest and most complex customers across the globe, across several different industries. Some of the brand names, as you could see here, varying from Discovery to Royal Bank of Scotland, Shell, NVIDIA, General Electric. Again, just shows the width and the breadth of our customers. So that was very quickly a very quick overview about the company, and want to quickly now transition over to our fireside chat and get into the discussion topics for today. So starting out, Thomas, with you, would love to hear your thoughts on what's the industry outlook for mobile testing.
So mobile testing has been a thing now for a while, right? And there's so many aspects to it. You have the software aspect, you have the use case aspect, you have the hardware aspect, you have the integration stack below it. There's so much different, so many different aspects to consider here. And when we talk about mobile first, and companies are moving towards mobile first, they're also moving experience first, right? And if we're transitioning from something that is fairly standardized, like a web browser on a desktop, to something more native again, something more related to the hardware, you get things like fragmentation of devices. You get things like interoperability. We are seeing a lot of use cases where different phones interact with each other by Bluetooth, for example, or scanning RFID. So it's not only the software part, it's also how it's used in a real world environment to have the end-to-end user's experience that you end up having. And with that, testing becomes a lot more complex, a lot more difficult, but also a lot more exciting. Yeah.
Great. Anamika, anything that you would want to add to what Thomas just mentioned?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I think the overall industry outlook for mobile testing has been really strong, and it has grown so much over the past couple of years. And I think it continues to grow, and it will keep picking up pace. Because, as more and more businesses continue to invest in the mobile technology, the demand for mobile testing will also is only, going to grow. So with users adopting it so well in the market, and also the users becoming tech savvy each passing day, I feel just delivering the app based on, the functionality that it is expected to deliver is not going to suffice to win the market. The focus is now shifting more on improving usability and user experience. How intuitive your app is, how fast is it performing? How secure is your data with the application? It all matters a lot, isn't it? And a seamless user experience makes you a player in the long run, actually. And along with this shift to the mobile first applications, we also see an increase in the automation testing tools to support this whole mobile testing landscape, and thus making the whole process more efficient and reduce the time of the overall testing that it is taking right now. Also, given the sea of mobile devices, platforms, OS versions that are available today, it is very important to devise a strategy which approaches from the point of view of maximum test coverage and also compatibility checks. So, yep, I think those are a few changes which we see in the industry outlook these days.
Great, great. And I love the fact that you mentioned about being user-friendly, because that's something that we are also hearing, that, there's a lot more focus on the UX, and the fact that UX is now the North Star metric for a lot of the organizations when it comes to testing, right?
Yeah.
So you did talk a little bit about mobile first, right? And this shift is something that we've seen recently just rise up exponentially, primarily driven by COVID, when companies had no option but to go mobile first, because that's where the demand was, right? We have several different stats that talks about, how over the last 2 years, the evolution or the move to mobile has happened, which would have probably taken, say, close to 5 to 7 years. And it's also very important for a lot of companies, because almost 3 out of every $4 is now on the mobile devices. So it's very important that you have a very strong mobile presence. But the question that I perhaps want to maybe ask to both of you is, how has this transition to a mobile first approach different from a desktop first? That's one. And then how has this impacted the entire software development lifecycle and the QA teams for you and your clients? So Thomas, if you want to take that one first.
Sure. So I think in order to see how it has impacted it, we can also look a bit at history and where this all comes from, right? If you look at the very first systems, like mainframes, things like that, with a fairly standardized interface, most of the logic was or all of the logic was basically on the mainframe. Then you went to this kind of client server structure with a fat client, a lot of logic on the device itself. Your desktop computer, basically working on that with a lot of different platforms. And if we look at testing, we had all of these different UI frameworks and all of these different pieces to it and different server protocols. And then there was the wave of standardization, right? Everybody was using a browser. Most of the work was done on the server side. And then again, more stuff came to the client, like JavaScript, and now the mobile devices as we have them. And now we see things like edge computing and things like that. So again, we are in a world where we have fragmented end devices that people are working on, that have a lot of intelligence in there, that have become complex and very important to the use case. And that's only part of the story, because these other parts also still exist. So now we cannot look at mobile first in isolation. It becomes part of a longer chain of management systems that are still client server applications. We have people talking to their home assistant, to their smart assistant, saying to put something in the shopping basket, then going to the browser to kind of take a closer look at more stuff, and then going to the mobile device to show it to their significant other to say, hey, do we want to buy this? And then they actually shop it on there. So that means you have to look at it from an integrated perspective. You need to consider the devices, the environment, the context in which all of this is happening. So we have multiple generations coexisting. We have overarching use cases that we need to test, and all of that in a really fast and highly iterative way. So how do you do that, right? And there's two movements there that I think play a lot into it. One is the shift left. Test early, test often, test as quickly as possible, as early as possible, but also the kind of shift right. How do we make sure that the actual experience that the user is receiving at the end, how do we make sure that works? And that's not a simple problem to solve. And I think platforms like BrowserStack, other technologies that are coming up. There's a lot of tooling, a lot of different things to do. Now it becomes a question of priorities. Where do you want to invest? And which pieces of that process can you test in isolation, and which of them only make sense in an end-to-end process? So we see both of that a lot. And that also means that your software development lifecycle needs to support all of these different types of testing. And that makes, a really sound test quality and testing and test automation strategy very much essential.
Yeah. And I love the example that you gave, Thomas, the interconnectedness across, the desktops and then different devices. And I could relate a lot to myself as well, because at times my wife and I shop and we're on different applications, but then we still need to engage and interact among ourselves and say, hey, does this work? Doesn't that work? So love that example. Anamika, anything you would want to add to what just Thomas mentioned?
Sure. So I personally feel that this transition has impacted everyone in the software space of late, and not only at a company or at project level, but also at individual and personal levels. I think some of Thomas's examples were on the same lines. But at a company and project level, we have incorporated a lot of changes in terms of how we develop and we test our mobile applications or mobile products for that matter. So the development focus, it has now shifted from just functionality to making apps more easy to use, responsive, and providing a seamless user experience, right? And now with that transition in the development approach, our testing also needs to be more focused on things like testing across multiple devices, platforms, screen sizes, operating systems, etc., to ensure a consistent user experience, basically. So at the end, we all, are jotting down to user experience a lot these days. And talking more about the transformations at the individual or at a team level. So our thought process, it needs to adapt and align to the mobile first approach for this whole game to, work out well for us. We need specialized skills and knowledge of mobile operating systems, device configurations, network protocols, to start with a few. And QA teams, they need to be trained on, to test for mobile specific scenarios, such as network latency, battery consumption, touch inputs, etc., which were earlier not there for the desktops or the browsers that we tested, right? So now QAs also need to be ramped up with the knowledge of automation tools to speed up this whole testing cycle, to speed up this whole process, because now we just don't have 2-3 browsers to test on, right? Instead, we have like a whole bunch of devices, resolutions, platform versions, and whatnot. And also, I think last but not the least, there is an increased need for collaboration between development and QA teams. Then there is the implementation of DevOps methodologies, which should be in place, CI/CD and continuous testing to address the issues quickly, because that also, completely changes the game for you. So yes, a lot of changes in all fronts that we see here. In fact, a lot of us, a lot of our clients are coming to us to strategize their mobile approach, mobile first approach with us. And especially we see this shift in BFSI, where, mobile banking is taking over all the traditional banking ways, and users now just want to get everything done on their mobile phones instead of going and queuing up in front of some counter. So yeah, one important factor, I think another additional to the discussed topics, I think another important factor is to always test on physical or real devices to get real-time test results instead of relying on, simulators and emulators. If I just talk about the mobile testing ways or approaches. So we also have an internal asset management team helping us with helping different projects and helping us with the required devices. But as we all know, the whole world has gone remote and distributed in the past 2-3 years, and asset management has also become a big challenge. And that's when we and our clients also pivoted and moved towards the cloud device farms for testing on real devices, all available to them remotely. So yep, another quick but important adoption we did for in our test strategies was the usage of device farms.
Yeah. And no, the great point, Anamika. A couple of thoughts on a couple of things that you mentioned, right? It's not just a few browsers anymore on
Yeah.
desktop. It's several different devices. In fact, just last week, Samsung launched two new models as well, S23 and S23 Ultra, right? A few months back. I think like last year there was iPhones and other devices prior to that as well. And it's just like so many newer devices are coming in the market and everybody wants to move into that one, but there's a large population which is still on the older devices, and so it's
Right.
just such a massive device that you need to ensure. And talking about devices, um, by the way, BrowserStack did release S23 and S23 Ultra 2 days before it was generally available in the market for everybody to test on their real devices. So not that I do it always, but love to give a shout out to BrowserStack whenever they do things like that. Over to you, Thomas, again. You work with several customers, like Nagarro as an organization has helped several different customers in their testing approach, desktops as well as the mobile as well. So just would love to hear a little bit more about what's your approach or what's Nagarro's approach to taking clients in their journey of mobile testing, especially the ones that have just starting or any sort of, insights. Would love to hear a little bit more, and also for our audience to see, what can they do for as part of that. Yeah.
So I think the first thing you need to consider when you talk about that, and I mean, we meet a lot of different customers in different situations, right? So, and we see an increased maturity in testing approaches and also test automation as compared to maybe 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, when we would interact with the customer, it was likely that they didn't have any test automation in place or any test strategy. This is still sometimes happens, but it's become more the exception. But what we do see is that often these things have grown organically over a while, right? And there's a bit of a lack of focus or strategy behind the whole thing. So what we do is, and that's one of the first things we do, especially when we talk about automation and scaling up, is we take a look at what is the key outcome you want to have here? What are the key cases? What is the use case that makes the money that is maybe safety critical? And we do that by taking a whole bunch of stakeholders usually, and we lock them into a room with us for about 2 or 3 hours. And we ask them the question, and each of them we ask a question to the group is, if you had 2 hours to test the product before you ship it, what would you do? And then suddenly you have project managers, scrum masters, developers, DevOps engineers, testers, all having slightly different points of view. And when you overlay all of that and you kind of see the commonalities and differences, that's where the meat is. And that's where you see, okay, how far can we go with test automation? How far should we go? How far can we go with testing? What are the gaps? How do we fill those gaps with manual testing? And that's, I think, this process of locking people into a room that are working anyway every day with each other, and just with the joint topic of taking that view and that perspective is an eye-opener for us usually, because it's one of the first meetings we have them. But also we've gotten a lot of feedback from the participants that even for them it was like, wow, they didn't realize that this was the point of view of a developer, for example. Yeah. And taking that and kind of making and turning that into something actionable and an actual testing strategy and solution, I think that's where we have a lot of experience, which we can just bring into to make the whole process smoother and more painless.
Okay. Yeah, I love the fact that you lock the example that you gave, like, locking them up and saying, hey, you just have 2 hours. Maybe that's something we can try with our engineers at BrowserStack. I'm sure they're not gonna love me for that specific approach, but I think I get the point, right? It's like it just helps somebody prioritize and focus on, like, hey, what's the most essential. This is kind of thinking is not there in our day-to-day approach, right? So thanks a lot for that, Thomas. And Anamika, coming back to you, you did touch a little bit upon this in your previous response, right? There are so many different devices and fragmentation, and the fact that asset management is also getting more and more complicated. So in your experience, what would you say are the top challenges that customers face when they are, transitioning into this mobile first, or taking mobile or giving mobile more importance, or mobile testing more importance, right? So what would you say are some of those, challenges, and would love to hear if there are any examples as well.
Sure. I think the major changes for clients or teams or testers is executing the same test case over and over again on multiple devices for behavioral and visual consistency, right? So the testers primarily face a challenge in testing across a range of devices while maintaining the quality of their releases. With device fragmentation, I think we have already talked about it a lot of times by now, becoming increasingly challenging to solve. It becomes highly probable for testers to miss a particular use case on some particular, device or OS, which eventually might end up resulting in poor user experience, which no one wants, not the business, not the testing teams, right? And the challenge is even more significant for the clients who want to target global markets and launch globally at once, where devices with different fragmentations and capabilities are used, right? Second, I think the issue is with respect to adoption of usability of apps differently in different geographies. For example, I think this is quite evident, like iPhone, it enjoys a larger market share in the US and Europe, whereas the Asian markets are more towards Android. And hence, testing of certain use cases device by device, it becomes really challenging when especially we are targeting to do it on physical or actual real devices. So, and this also reminds me of one of our clients whom we are right now helping test with a similar situation with devices. So they have an application where, they basically have to verify IDs of different citizens over Bluetooth transfer to the verifier's phone from the verifier's device. So they came to us with a problem statement that post their testing and launch, they are facing a lot of issues with the verifier and verifies devices are not compatible to share data over Bluetooth. And so we basically supported them by preparing a list of all the popular mobile phones and devices being used in Austria and Europe, and helping them test the combination of these two devices for Bluetooth compatibility for all the popular devices in the present market. So, yeah, I think overall it has become quite imperative for teams to shift to automation to cope up with the need to test and regress more frequently, more repeatedly for multiple devices, and also adopting technologies and newer, cloud platforms to streamline the issues that we just discussed. So maybe, Thomas, you can add the example of the compliance and geofencing testing that we did.
Oh yeah, sure. So what there's a couple of cases, and I think that one of the challenges is like when you have things like geofencing, how do you test geofencing? So we had one customer that had a license to operate in one particular state in the US. So how do you test that that particular app only works in that state, right? And there's a lot of regulations around it and a lot of different use cases. So of course you can hire a bunch of testers locally and have them, drive around and test. And then if something goes wrong, back to the start, and you do multiple iterations of that. But that becomes hugely expensive, right? So what we did is we shifted it, right? We used a lot of fake geofencing or fake positioning data, and we tested everything with a central team, all of these cases, all of the special cases. And once we knew the logic was sound, it was in principle working, then we had one person, or I think we ended up having two people, really, driving around the borders of the state, crossing over into the neighboring states at key points and crossing back into it.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and that works if you do it once for 2 weeks. But you cannot scale that efficiently, right? You can only scale it if you take a smart approach to solving this challenge. And that's kind of an idea that we're quite proud of how we progressed here, because it actually, I mean, if you would calculate it, the budget was cut, like it was a fraction of what it would have been otherwise. It was just basically not been feasible otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can imagine having a full-time employees driving around the entire country, different countries, with phones in their hands and then testing. So absolutely, I love the example that Anamika, you and Thomas both gave. Before we move on to the next question, I think would want to just run another quick poll with our audience here, just because we've been talking quite a bit around the mobile testing and some of the challenges. So just one second. I think the poll question is just perhaps loading up. Yeah. So again, I think before we move forward, would love to hear a little bit more from our audience in terms of what are some of the primary challenges that you face when doing mobile app testing, right? And so that also just kind of like helps us to see like, if the content is more relevant to you, again, as the similar approach, could do a QR code scanning or go to slido.com and put in the same code, right? So the options, again, one of the ones that we typically hear is the device infrastructure and the fact that newer devices are coming. How do we manage those, right? Poor release velocity is something that we've heard as well. Again, not the top one. And yeah, I think slow decision making by the top management. That's again varies by organization to organization. Right? Let's see if we get a few more responses coming back in. Okay, so very clearly, Thomas and Anamika, I think some of the examples that you gave very relevant is, how do we test? It all comes down to like the devices, the infrastructures that companies have, or the lack thereof, right? To kind of like get to that scale of the different devices, right? So thanks everyone for participating. This was very helpful. Coming back to our kind of like chat. Every company is different, right, Thomas? Somebody's just testing on, starting mobile testing. Some of them have been, mobile first from the start. So every company is on a different stage of maturity, right? So what is your experience in dealing with different companies who are at a different maturity stage, right? And they want to move to that mobile first approach, right? So Anamika, if you perhaps want to get started this time.
Yeah, sure. So probably again, circling back to what Thomas said for one of his previous replies, where we cater to clients with different levels of maturity in terms of testing, test management, test automation, and all the aspects of testing. And we have some very old clients who started with mainframe testing and all, but now they're all shifting to latest technologies, moving on to cloud, moving to cloud-based testing and all of that. So, yep, there are cases where, the client has been primarily managing their testing internally and hence having a very low test maturity models in place. And sometimes this happens with businesses as their prime focus is the product, and many a times processes and test processes specifically and best practices, they get ignored unintentionally or unknowingly, right? So again, one of the reasons why there is a wide variety of test maturity levels. For instance, there was a customer who developed their UI UX of the app, and then they started testing after 3-4 sprints. And the project team at Nagaro, we figured out that the app had severe usability issues. The time to realize the value of the app, value from the app or any particular flow, was really getting longer due to a larger number of clicks in that workflow. So this might not sound like an issue with the functionality because it is doing what it was supposed to do or expected to do, but it is just taking 10 clicks for the user to achieve the same thing, which otherwise could have been done maybe with 3 or 4 clicks at max, right? So this is where we also come in with our expertise in how we can improve the overall usability of the app, not just test and check on the functionality. And hence, we help them not only in adopting newer test methodologies, but we also went an extra mile to fix all the existing usability issues that they had. And again, I think this would be the right time to highlight that we have a framework in Nagaro, which we call as the 360-degree health check. And it is in place and we use it to identify the current maturity of quality assurance in a client project. And we do something called as thinking breakthroughs workshops with the clients. And we help them identify the gaps that they have and how can we fill those with them, not just as some software testing vendor, but as partners and trying to add value to them in all possible ways. And I think recently we got a request from one of our existing clients. It's a media giant, and they are testing their website on mobile browsers. So, and the challenge that they are facing is it is becoming very difficult for them to purchase new devices every, with a new launch, which is very frequent these days, right? So, yep, we were very quick to suggest again cloud device farms, including BrowserStack to them. And we did a POC for them on how easy and quick it is to test on these device farms and on the devices of your choice, both manually and by automated testing.
Great, great. And yeah, I think especially with the remote first, it now becomes even more complicated to share devices, right? Earlier, when employees were there in that same physical office,
Yeah.
you could kind of share devices between different teams, even though there was some sort of a wait or a lag time, it was still logistically possible. Now with remote first or kind of that hybrid model, even though if a company buys these, it's just like becomes a little bit more complicated to share those ones, right? So moving on, I think Thomas would love to get your thoughts on this next question, right? So we did talk about some of the challenges. We spoke about how different companies are in different phases of their maturity. What I think would be very helpful to get your thoughts on is, what would you say are some of the key parameters that companies should focus on when they want to adopt this mobile first approach, right? What are the things that they kind of need to ensure such that they get kind of into a smoother process when they go down that path, right?
So I'm a techie, right? I'm a geek. I love technology. I love all the fancy toys and all the newest tech. But I think for me, testing and test automation and things like that are no longer so much a technical issue, right? As Anamika said, it's fairly easy to connect to an app and test it, and there's lots of tools and platforms on the market. The question is, how do you enable quality within your organization? It becomes a cultural phenomenon, and things like dev QA handshakes, DevOps culture, organizational change along the lines that help your business move into that direction. As I said previously, taking an integrated view on what is generating value by and for your organization, that has a huge impact, right? It has an impact on how do you collaborate? What does your organization and team structure look like? What skills do you need? How do you build those skills? So now we're suddenly facing another thing. And as I said previously, it's not instead of the old thing, it's on top of the old thing. So that kind of interdisciplinary thinking and culture and overarching strategy towards not only mobile first, but also UX first and also quality first. Yeah? It also means quality first. That is huge, right? So it means you need to think about infrastructure. You need about who are the stakeholders. How do you measure the success? And Amika brought the example of how many clicks does it take to get to the value that the user is expecting. So it's really a holistic view on quality that you need to establish. It's not any one thing. It's a whole bunch of concepts and processes and practices that tie into each other. And that's what makes it very exciting, but it can also be very, very daunting to, try to approach it. And the other aspect that we often see is that we saw a huge wave of agile and teams becoming autonomous, and each of them, doing what's best to get towards their goal and finishing their backlog to have a healthy velocity and deliver the things that they're tasked with. But the flip side of that is also fragmentation, not only on the device market, but also within your organization, likely. So likely if those teams are autonomous, they will pick different tools, different strategies. So at what point, if you're now thinking in an overarching concept of quality, how do you bring that back up? What is the level of comparability or abstraction that you want to have when you are thinking in an overarching manner? And we have a couple of exciting projects right now that are doing exactly that. And we don't want to take the team's autonomy away, but we want to give them the tools and we want to enable them and also enable reporting, or at least an honest and transparent view on the actual quality of the end-to-end value chain. Yeah, and those I think are the main parameters when you think, and this is kind of the the main mindset that you need to take to this. Otherwise, it will become, a mess in certain ways. Yeah.
No, I love the fact, Thomas, as you said, right? I mean, being autonomous is so much critical these days, right? It just allows and empowers team to go forward with their own strategy, which might work well for one team, but may or may not work for the other team. And that's why, having that independence and autonomy is so much critical. And the fact that you allow organizations to go down that path, I think that's great. And then you also mentioned a bit about the infrastructures and the apps. So before we move on to the next question, I wanted to do another hand raiser for the audience. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, that with BrowserStack, we do have a couple of app testing products, our App Live and App Automate, where you can test on more than 100 plus unique different devices, several hundreds of device browsers and OS combinations. And we also do some sort of, free trials that we typically give. So would love to see if, folks are interested in seeing BrowserStack's app testing products in action. If you give a yes, somebody from the BrowserStack team would reach out to you to see how we can kind of like help you provide some sort of a demo or some other options to help you get started, right? So see a lot of folks, almost close to 80% are interested in kind of like learning more about the app testing products. So just will hold on the poll for maybe a few more seconds. Great, awesome. Thanks everyone for your product or kind of like your interest in looking more around the products, right? So Thomas and Amika, I think we are almost like close to that last 15-ish minutes. And I see a lot of questions coming in the chat window as well. So I would just maybe want to ask you a few more questions before we go and jump and address the audience's questions. So for both of you, anybody, if you want to take that question first, is can you talk a little bit about the impact of shift left testing approach for mobile testing, and in your experience, how are organizations using automation to drive this change? Because we know automation has been around, testing automation has been around, but now with this change, how are organizations kind of really leveraging automation? Anamika, Thomas, any one of you guys?
Yeah. So I think Nagarro project teams, we start focusing on testing as early, as the development process, as early in the development process as possible. And if I talk about as early, I mean at the very wireframe stage, is when we start looking at the functionality and the usability. So as the wireframes are ready, the teams start performing usability testing and at the wireframes, which are still not bound to any other element of the application or the final app, which is yet to be developed. So that gives us a nice feedback on how we are doing in the usability, or how many flows we have, if all the flows are working fine, if we can optimize those flows of the application. Is the similar example again for the number of clicks, number of or on the UI, how intuitive is the UI. We can make all those usability related things and check on those at the very wireframe stage itself, and not waiting for the app or the UI to be developed, come to us for functional testing, and then giving those feedbacks. Another thing is, again, with shift left, we start the testing of business logics with APIs even before we have the UI testable. So that gives us an edge on if all the business logics, all the APIs are working fine. And not just that, this is something which I won't call as shift left, but again, this is something which we do for quick feedback on how the apps are doing in production. So even after deployment or in post production, we keep monitoring the apps for app and user matrices, which gives us a picture on how the app is being adopted by the users using the analytics and monitoring tools that we have in the market these days. And this gives us an edge over the next cycles of releases and deployments that we are going to have. So, yep, I think a lot of thinking and efforts are going in that direction.
Awesome. Thomas, anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I think for shift left there's two aspects, right? There's the aspect, what is the early, let's say the test pyramid that I can test, but also how do I get fast feedback, right? And if we look at the end-to-end process of testing on a mobile device, there's a lot of layers, right? I have the issue might be in the app, then I have a log there, or I have a log on the server, I have a log somewhere else in the database. So how do I make sense, especially in scaling up test automation? If I have thousands of test cases and just a small percentage of them fail every day, I'm pretty much busy at least half of the whole day. Maybe I even have a whole team, analyzing what actually went wrong. So how do I deal with that? And what we're doing in that area, and what is also right now something that lots of our customers and projects appreciate, is that we build custom reporting on top of test log files. Basically, we analyze them and using machine learning, for example, to get to the root cause quicker. So instead of in the morning coming in and finding 300 failed test cases, they find in maybe 4 or 5 root causes, and they can investigate those and get half a day of their work back, right? And also transparency on the weak points. So I think shift left is not only a matter of test pyramid, but also of making sure that even if you go wider, or let's say more towards the top of the pyramid, it still becomes scalable, feasible, and generates valuable and transparent output.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, guys. I have a few more questions for you, but I think we want to spend a little bit time on the questions from the audience. And then if we have time at the end, we can come back to the question that I have, right? So the first one in the chat is there still a use case for on-prem custom device labs, or would you always recommend cloud service providers like BrowserStack?
So I think Anamika talked about one particular case where it's a bit difficult to test it with a device farm. I mean, they're hugely useful, but if you're talking about, for example, putting 2 different devices near each other with Bluetooth communication or RFID use cases, there is still a place for them. I think it's just a matter of which of these tests do you need to scale, and can you scale, and which of these tests are just locally bound in one way or another. I think that's at least one of the dimensions, that maybe Anamika has a couple more to add, but in that sense, for sure.
So yes, even we at Nagarro are also trying to have some on-prem, only Nagarro specific or company specific device farms with all the devices that we have with our asset management. That ways, giving access, since Nagarro is already work from anywhere on work from anywhere model, and we all mostly are working from our homes. So it's very difficult to get access, and also difficult for the asset management teams to basically moderate all of this. So that is why we are also trying to do something in-house, something which will be just specific to Nagarro projects and clients, which is completely in on-prem and would be accessible over our internal networks. So yeah, that also can be done. And but again, that brings up the question of how frequently do we want to purchase devices, and also for the same device we have, for example, we just don't have iPhone 14, we have a Pro Max, we have Mini and whatnot. So such kind of issues will always be there, which we will have to think and create that balance, and in that we have to think which would be the best suitable way for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully iPhone is, or Apple is, resolving the issues with the demand, right? Like not being able to match up. And then maybe just to add to that, Thomas and Amika, maybe another use case for the actual physical devices is if somebody wants a career driving around with those mobile phones in different countries. If you want to build a career in that, yes, absolutely.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think I'll volunteer for that one.
Okay. So moving on, can you tell me the name or give any recommendations of a tool in which we can check the responsiveness and compatibility of the web apps and hybrid apps?
So I'll take that first. So we have an in-house, we have our in-house framework We call it A2A driven, which is advanced, automation approach. And that caters to all sorts of automation needs, which we have for web, mobile, APIs, desktop, database, and visual testing. So visual testing is something which is, now becoming very popular, given that the plethora of screen sizes, resolutions we have out there in the market. And so there are quite a few tools in the market which are capable of doing that. Some are again paid tools, some are open source libraries. But again, you have to know how to use those libraries like OpenCV, which is a image processing library, which I think many even paid tools are using under the hood for visual testing. So we can leverage that with our free open source tool APM to create a framework and leverage it for visual testing for your resolution or any visual comparison needs. So yeah, our framework is already capable of doing that, and you can also go for paid tools or other tools available in the market.
Great. The next one from Andreas. What stack do you use to handle E2E automated tests for mobile native apps? Do you have any E2E testing strategy in CI to ensure stability for critical flows?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this is something we encounter rather frequently, and then Annika already mentioned A2A driven. So we take a very vendor tool neutral aspect to the whole thing. There's a whole bunch of different tools that can do that and different platforms that can do that. But it's more a question of who you are. How is your company set up? Do you have in-house development teams? Can your testers deal with code? Do you have the support it, or are you maybe a company that is mainly working with standard software and integrating that? All of these have different strategies and different tool strategies. We are building our own, as Annika has said, called A2A driven across multiple open source and also commercial solutions, also integrated, for example, with BrowserStack and then other platforms and other tools. And that kind of means that we have a modular approach to the whole thing, because we're a services company, right? We work with lots of different companies that have different technology stacks, that have different and often even heterogeneous environments that we need to deal with. So it's not one single tool, one single approach. It's something that we tailor a bit for everyone while keeping the main strategies the same.
And the next one, I think, Anamika, you touched upon it a little bit during one of your earlier responses. The question is there a difference between functional testing on emulator simulators versus testing on actual physical devices? And should most tests happen on actual devices?
Yeah, so definitely. And we make sure that, all the testing teams here in Nagarro, we do test the regressions, or, at least before the final release, we are doing a rigorous testing on actual devices, because that is always, something which gives us the real picture of how our application is performing on the real device hardware. Emulators and simulators, we already know, they are using the hardware and resources from the underlying device or computer or desktop that it is running on. So it sometimes is not able to give us the actual picture or in terms of the non-functional testing requirements or non-functional aspects of testing. So yep, something which is very important. So always test on physical devices before you're going into the market.
Great, awesome. And then the next one, I love the next two questions actually. And I guarantee you that wasn't a plan from BrowserStack, but the question is, will there be some cool innovation and new feature listed in today's session developed by BrowserStack? And a few questions later, what is new coming in BrowserStack, which kind of like sets me up for one of my slides that I was planning to do it at the end, but maybe I might just share with you guys earlier. So to answer your question, no, nothing new or exciting being shared today. However, we have a webinar on Percy on the 1st of March, and we have something really, really cool and an exciting announcement that we're going to make on that day, on that specific webinar. So for the folks who asked that question or is interested in something cool and new innovations coming in BrowserStack, I would really highly encourage you to attend the webinar on 1st of March. As I said, like we have an exciting announcement coming on that day. And while we're on this slide, firstly, of course, wanted to thank Thomas and Anamika for their time, but also would like to really encourage you guys to just go and perhaps check out Nagarro on their website, nagarro.com/AQT, and see how they're helping customers and how they are helping shaping the future of quality, right? So that kind of like helps answer the next question. Back again to the next one is, I'm a tester using Selenium framework. How easy is mobile testing if you know Selenium?
You want to take that, Thomas?
Sure. So we've seen an influx of different frameworks and platforms using the WebDriver protocol. So, like if you remember a long time ago, I'm old. I feel old now. There were all these different tools, and there was no standard for test automation. And then Selenium came along, and with its second version, it established the I believe it was the second version. Yeah, or was it the third? I think the second. It established the WebDriver protocol, which and then became standardized by the W3C, right? And that's kind of the basis of it. There are a lot of specifics to mobile testing in how identifiers work and what the strategies around that, what you can do, what you cannot do, how to get them to actually interact with your physical device, how to use emulators and simulators. But if you know Selenium, you have at least part of that puzzle already in your head, which is, how do I automate an application? How do I automate the flow? And how, especially also with the WebDriver protocol, does that kind of interaction and also provision of a node that is executing for you, you already have that. Yeah.
Great. Just a few more questions. And then for the folks, perhaps that we might not be able to answer questions, we'll try to address it via email, right? The next one from Stefan, which types of testing besides functional can and should be automated in the area of mobile testing? For example, usability, accessibility, what would you recommend?
Yeah, accessibility for sure, because that is something which is becoming a mandate in many countries now. And soon, I think it will be here in India as well. So, yep, already a lot of countries are having norms of following WCAG3 guidelines and all of that. And, this is not a very popularly discussed topic, accessibility, but it is very important. And we do have, in-house testers who are actually specially abled, and they help us in doing accessibility testing of the mobile apps, web apps that we are developing for our customers. So that's one part. For talking about automation, yes, definitely it is very easy to automate accessibility actually, and many people are kind of not aware, or sometimes they're scared, like there are so many things to check on this. But there are libraries that are available, plugins that are available, that give you like direct results if you are following, if you have it and you are walking through your code, or you're running your test cases. It basically crawls through whatever DOM you are applying it on, and it gives you a result of a report wherein it says which all were the compliant elements or web elements, on which all are not, and how much difference is there, or what exactly is the error on that particular element. So yep, accessibility is one. Usability, yes, but it is not very easy to basically automate the usability, because it is kind of subjective and not very much objectified or basically put into a fixed formula yet. But yeah, I think with the advent of AI and ML algorithms, probably that will also be soon possible.
Great. And then the last one is I mean, there are a few more, as I said. We'll try to address those via email, but since we are on time, perhaps one last one is, can camera testing be done on device farms?
Camera testing, Yes, but we have not tried that. We have tried it on emulators actually, but again, for emulators, we have a direct place where we upload the image that we want to project to the camera. That is how we do it. But for device farms, I think they work along the same similar lines. But yes, definitely there is a way in which we are doing a lot of code around capturing barcodes and working with QR codes and all. So yes, that is something which we can do.
And then I think the person clarified like scanning. And
Mhm.
to answer a question, Ashish, yes, a lot of those use cases are possible with BrowserStack on their app testing devices. We do have a lot of device features that can mimic if you are testing with very similar to like having a real physical mobile device in hand. So we do enable a lot of those, just depends on the use case that you are trying to test for. So with that, thank you so much, Anamika and Thomas, for your time. That was some very, very insightful and valuable um, information that you shared. And I hope like our audience enjoyed the session as much as I did and learned quite a bit from you guys as well. So thank you once again for your time. And thanks everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks.
Thanks so much
Sure.
for having
Thank you
us.
so much.